Nobody could have imagined that a quiet man in a trance would become the voice of the dead. But for more than 50 years, Maurice Barbanell sat in silence while another presence spoke through him. What that voice claimed was not from this world. This is not just a story about a medium. It's the true account of a man who became a channel for messages from the other side. Maurice Barbanell didn't seek fame, and he never claimed credit for the words that passed through his lips. With his eyes closed and his body still, he entered deep trance states, while a voice that was not his own shared messages of comfort, warning, and astonishing insight. The spirit identified himself only as a friend from the spirit world, and the information he brought was often so precise, so personal, and so transformative that it left witnesses speechless. His name was Maurice Barbanell, and what he revealed, through hundreds of sessions and decades of work, continues to challenge the idea that death is the end. This channel takes no side, it simply presents the facts, the stories, and the people behind them. Whether you believe or not is entirely up to you. But the experience we're presenting was documented in detail and witnessed by many. And perhaps that's worth listening to. Maurice Barbanell did not believe in spirits. He didn't believe in life after death, in mediums, or in anything that could not be measured or verified. In his early years, he was a staunch atheist and a sharp-minded journalist, rooted in reason, logic, and skepticism. He had no interest in spiritualism and considered seances little more than superstition. So when he reluctantly agreed to attend a sitting with a medium in the early 1930s, at the invitation of a friend, it was more out of curiosity than belief. He was, by his own account, determined to expose it as nonsense. But what happened at that seance would change the course of his life. During the session, Barbanell unexpectedly slipped into a deep trance. He had not expected to participate, let alone be the focus of the event. Yet his body went still, his voice changed, and a message began to come through him. He remembered none of it afterward. When he later listened to the recording, he was stunned. The words he heard weren't his, and the tone was unlike anything he recognized. The presence that spoke through him identified itself not by name, but simply as a guide from the spirit world, intent on sharing wisdom and helping others through him. Barbanell was disturbed. He questioned his own mind. Was it self-hypnosis, some psychological trick? Determined to understand what had happened, he repeated the experiment over and over under controlled conditions. Each time, he entered trance. Each time, another voice came forward. And each time, he awoke with no memory of what had been said. The messages were calm, consistent, and often deeply insightful. Still skeptical, he invited witnesses, scientists, journalists, and spiritual leaders to observe. Many were astonished. No trickery, no preparation, no incentive. Just a man, entering silence and becoming something else. Eventually, the spirit began to use the name Silver Birch, a symbolic title rather than a personal identity. It explained that personality was unimportant and that the goal was service, to communicate truths from beyond, to comfort the grieving, and to teach spiritual principles that transcended religion. Barbanell himself remained cautious. He refused to commercialize the sessions. He never charged money. He demanded full transparency. Every session was recorded, transcribed, and published through trusted channels, including Psychic News, the newspaper he founded to document and share evidence of the afterlife. To the end of his life, Barbanell insisted he was merely a channel. He did not seek the spotlight. In public, he was reserved and rational. But when in trance, a different voice emerged, measured, profound, and endlessly compassionate. What mattered most to him was not who was speaking through him, but what was being said. The consistency, depth, and emotional impact of the messages convinced thousands that something real was happening. And though he remained analytical, even cautious, he could no longer deny the truth he had once tried to disprove. Barbanell's story is not just about belief. It's about evidence. It's about a man who trusted reason, but who, through direct experience, came face to face with something reason could not explain. And in the end, he gave his life to making sure that voice, the voice of the dead, would be heard. Throughout Maurice Barbanell's decades-long work as a trance medium, hundreds of sessions were documented, recorded, and witnessed, many of them in the presence of journalists, clergy, and even scientists. What set these communications apart was not only their clarity, but their specificity. They were not vague suggestions or poetic metaphors. The messages that came through were often precise: names, locations, private memories, even warnings. These were things Maurice Barbanell, in his conscious state, could not possibly have known. Yet they were spoken, live, in front of observers, and in many cases, later verified. One of the most frequently cited cases involved a grieving mother who attended a session desperate for comfort. Her son had died suddenly, and she had received no closure. During the trance, the voice that spoke through Barbanell addressed her by name and proceeded to give personal details about the child, his nickname, a toy he had hidden, and a final conversation they had shared before his passing. The woman broke down in tears. These were facts she had told no one, not even close friends. To her, it was undeniable. Her son was reaching out. In another session, a spirit gave a strong warning about a potential gas leak in a home. The family receiving the message at first dismissed it, but within days, they had the property inspected. A serious leak was discovered, one that could have caused a deadly explosion. The family later credited that message with saving their lives. The case was written about in Psychic News and witnessed by a local clergyman who confirmed the events leading up to and following the message. Perhaps even more intriguing were the cases where the voice from the spirit world offered details about future events, details that, at the time of the session, seemed impossible or even absurd. In one instance, a prediction was made involving a legal dispute between two families over a piece of land. The session included the names of the parties, the location, and even the specific courtroom number. Months later, every element of the prediction came true. The case made its way to court exactly as described, and the judge, location, and outcome matched the message nearly word for word. Another striking case involved a man who had lost his father many years prior. During a session, the spirit speaking through Barbanell recounted a private moment from the father's life, something that had happened in wartime, known only to him and one other soldier. The details were so exact, including a coded phrase and a photograph, that the son was visibly shaken. After the session, he located the photo and corroborated the story with personal records and testimonies. What makes these stories so compelling is not just the emotional power behind them, but the consistency with which they occurred. Witnesses, some of them hardened skeptics, described feeling chills when they heard messages that could not be traced to any normal source. The voice through Barbanell never claimed to be miraculous. It claimed only to be honest, and its accuracy, over time, became impossible to ignore. Maurice Barbanell was always careful not to exaggerate or embellish. He knew the importance of credibility, but he also knew that these moments were sacred and that they offered something science could not yet explain. The spirits that spoke through him brought comfort, proof, and often purpose. And for those who heard the truth in their words, the world was never quite the same again. The messages that came through Maurice Barbanell during his trance sessions were not merely comforting. They formed a detailed, consistent vision of life after death that was philosophical, non-dogmatic, and spiritually profound. Time and again, the voice that spoke, identified simply as a guide from the spirit world, emphasized one essential truth: death is not an end. It is a continuation, a return, a beginning of a new phase in the eternal journey of the soul. According to the communications received through Barbanell, every person is a soul first and a physical being second. The body, it was said, is temporary, a vessel for experience, but the spirit is immortal and never ceases to exist. Upon physical death, the spirit is gently received into what was often referred to as the spirit world, a realm not of fantasy or clouds, but of intelligent structure, purpose, and harmony. There, the soul continues to grow, learn, and progress, often in the company of those it has loved in life and of beings more evolved who act as guides. One of the most important ideas conveyed through Barbanell was the law of cause and effect, sometimes described as a spiritual equivalent of karma. Every action, every thought, every intention leaves an imprint. What we create emotionally and spiritually, we eventually experience in return, not as punishment, but as education. This spiritual law, the messages said, governs both earthly life and life beyond. The soul's evolution depends on understanding and integrating these lessons over time. often through multiple incarnations. The concept of reincarnation was presented not as a belief, but as a natural process. The soul, in this view, may return to earthly existence more than once, each time with new opportunities to develop virtues, resolve unfinished growth, and contribute to the greater good. This cycle continues until the soul reaches a level of spiritual maturity where further physical embodiment is no longer needed. One of the most compelling themes in the communications was the explanation of suffering. Rather than viewing pain or loss as meaningless, the voice explained that suffering is often part of a larger plan chosen by the soul before birth. The difficulties we face are not random, but are part of a blueprint for growth. Experiences that challenge us to awaken deeper compassion, resilience, or spiritual awareness. Earth was described as a kind of spiritual school, a realm where we encounter not only joy, but also necessary trials that shape who we become. Importantly, the tone of these messages was never dogmatic or tied to any single religion. The voice repeatedly said that truth belongs to no sect and that spiritual reality transcends creed and culture. Love, service, and awareness were the core values. Living in harmony with others, caring for all forms of life, and recognizing the sacred within ourselves and others. The communications also offered reassurance about the moment of death itself. It was described as gentle, peaceful, and surrounded by help. No one dies alone. Upon leaving the body, the soul is often met by loved ones or spiritual guides who assist with the transition. Many descriptions of this process, shared through Barbanell, align closely with modern accounts of near-death experiences, encounters with light, feelings of overwhelming peace, and a sense of returning home. The purpose of life, the messages said, is not material success or perfection, but the awakening of the soul. Each person comes to Earth with a mission, sometimes known, often hidden, but always meaningful. Our relationships, our challenges, our acts of kindness, all shape our inner being and prepare us for what comes next. These teachings were not offered as abstract theories. They were delivered with clarity, compassion, and consistency, and they spoke to the deepest questions of existence. Why are we here? What happens after we die? And how can we live in a way that honors both? Through Maurice Barbanell, the answers were said to come from a place beyond this world, and for many, they changed everything. Maurice Barbanell was not a shadowy figure working in secrecy. He made it a principle to bring everything into the light. Unlike many who dabbled in spiritualism privately or under dramatic flair, Barbanell was measured, deliberate, and transparent. Every message delivered through him in trance was recorded, transcribed, and often published, either in books, pamphlets, or through psychic news. The newspaper he founded in 1932 to document spiritual phenomena and promote honest discussion about life after death. Through that platform, his work reached tens of thousands across Britain and beyond. Barbanell's approach stood out in an era when mediumship was often viewed with suspicion or seen as theatrical. He refused to charge money for sittings. He did not perform on stage or seek attention for himself. He insisted that his sessions be observed by others, sometimes including journalists, physicians, clergy, and members of academic institutions. His trance sittings were conducted with full awareness that they might be scrutinized, tested, or even challenged. But that was exactly how he wanted it. He believed the spirit world had nothing to hide. One of the key reasons Barbanell earned respect even from skeptics was his refusal to make extravagant claims. He consistently maintained that he was not the source of the information, merely a channel. He never claimed infallibility, and he encouraged others to judge the content of the messages for themselves. This humility made him hard to dismiss. Over time, even those who did not share his beliefs began to acknowledge the seriousness and integrity of his work. The content of the messages also contributed to their credibility. Rather than feeding people what they wanted to hear, the spirit teachings that came through Barbanell were often challenging, philosophical, and morally grounded. They addressed issues like justice, personal responsibility, compassion, and the deeper purpose of human life. This wasn't entertainment, it was a spiritual education. And for those seeking answers outside conventional religion, it struck a powerful chord. Psychic news itself became a hub for a growing community of spiritual seekers, thinkers, and researchers. It wasn't a fringe tabloid. It included thoughtful editorials, reports from around the world, interviews with scientists and theologians, and first-hand accounts from those who had experienced or witnessed spiritual phenomena. The newspaper maintained a tone of inquiry rather than dogma, and Barbanell's leadership ensured that it remained focused on truth-seeking rather than sensationalism. Over the years, various prominent figures publicly acknowledged Barbanell's work. His sessions were written about in mainstream publications, his books were reviewed seriously, and even academic conferences on consciousness and survival after death occasionally referenced his contributions. While full scientific consensus was never achieved, as might be expected with any topic involving the afterlife, Barbanell's role in elevating the conversation was undeniable. Crucially, his credibility was reinforced by the fact that he never tried to convert anyone. His goal wasn't to build a movement or gain followers. He saw himself as a temporary voice for those who no longer had one, and he viewed that role as a responsibility, not a platform for ego. His personal lifestyle reflected that. He lived modestly, avoided fame, and stayed focused on the message. By the end of his life, Maurice Barbanell had built a bridge, not just between the physical and spiritual worlds, but between believers and skeptics, seekers and scientists, the faithful and the curious. His work opened space for dialogue, for wonder, and for the possibility that death is not the end, but a mystery worth exploring. In an age of doubt, he offered not certainty, but evidence, and he did so with dignity, discipline, and profound respect for those on both sides of the veil. Maurice Barbanell's work was not built on fantasy or spectacle. It was built on the quiet conviction that death does not end communication. Again and again, through hundreds of trance sessions spanning more than half a century, one message came through with unwavering clarity. We do not die, we return. And we are never alone. For Barbanell, this truth wasn't a comforting theory. It was something he experienced firsthand, time after time. As a voice, not his own, spoke words of love, guidance, warning, and wisdom to those still living. These were not eerie whispers or cryptic riddles. They were full sentences, answers to questions, names and events, memories and messages. They came through clearly, often in front of witnesses, and they carried with them something that went beyond information. A sense of presence. He was always careful to remind people that it wasn't about him. He was not a guru or a prophet. He was a bridge, and the spirits who used his voice had something to say. That life continues, that the soul is eternal, and that love never ends. They spoke of a world not divided from ours by walls, but by vibration. They said they are still near, that they watch, they listen, and when they can, they speak. Barbanell often emphasized that the dead communicate in many ways, not just through mediums. They come in dreams that feel more real than waking life. They send impressions, sudden waves of peace, or uncanny timing that feels like a message. They leave signs, familiar smells, flickering lights, songs on the radio at just the right moment. And they reach us when we're open, quiet, and willing to listen. Near the end of his life, Barbanell conducted what would become one of his final public trance sessions. The room was quiet but expectant. Among those present were longtime followers and first-time witnesses, skeptics and believers alike. As he entered trance, a familiar voice emerged, gentle, calm, and distinct from his usual tone. The spirit spoke of transition, of reunion, of the continuous unfolding of the soul. But then came a moment that left the room frozen. With deep stillness, the voice said, "Death is not silence, it is another breath. We are breathing beside you, always." Several in the room would later describe the feeling that overcame them in that moment. Not fear, not confusion, but an unmistakable sense of someone being there. Not just a message, but a presence. The atmosphere was thick with emotion, and even those who doubted left in quiet reflection. Barbanell never tried to force belief. He didn't need to. The messages spoke for themselves, and the consistency of the messages left a strong impression on many observers. People changed because of what they heard. They found peace where there had been despair, hope where there had been grief, and above all, the unshakable sense that those they loved were not gone. They had simply gone ahead. Today, Maurice Barbanell's legacy lives on not only through his books, the archived sessions, and psychic news, but in the comfort he brought to thousands of people. His voice may have stopped, But the voices he channeled remind us of something timeless. The dead do not vanish. They do not disappear. They speak. Barbanell's message was simple. If these voices are real, they deserve to be heard. Whether we accept them or not, that choice is always ours. Dear friends, if you liked the video, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon.